Alright, here is my workspace from my project. I just wanted to give you an example of just how you probably should approach this or could approach this project. And the graph paper is really something that you should be using to get some symmetrical and even measurements. So to determine how wide you want the little forky things on the end and how long you want it, how where you're going to have straight lines, where you're going to have curved lines. The graph paper is a good reference for that and also helps with the design process. So if you didn't actually use the graph paper, you just drew freehand, you may want to reconsider that and start over and be a little bit more measured. So from this, I didn't actually trace this or anything, I actually just used the measurements, and so I can count each of the larger squares is 10 millimeters, each of the smaller squares is 2 millimeters. So I use those measurements from the center line to create these reference points. So I measured from the center line out to where this would be, put a little circle right there. Same thing with this one, put a little circle there. And to know where to put the circles, I drew little lines. I've since extended this line, but I started out just drawing some lines, and I have actually 3 layers to organize my space. I have the 0 layer I just use for some reference lines. The PDF image is this thing here, and then I have a layer for the side fork view and for the top fork. Those are just some tips on making your workspace a little bit easier. And then just feel free to use as many lines as you need to. I like to use a combination of lines and circles to just give me some snap places. So on here I would measure out, like say for instance, where this point would end. So I took a measurement from here to here, drew a line from here to here, and at the end point of that line I put a circle just to give myself a snap point for where to end this thing. And the outline I used, you can see there's a reference line here, reference line here. To get the outline shape, I just took some measurements. So this is a straight line between here and here. This one extends out over to here. So the reason I gave you graph paper, and the reason you should use the graph paper, is so that you can transfer your measurements from your paper to your actual drawing. So if you didn't give it some forethought, again, you may want to reconsider. So I have here a top view and then a side view. So when I started my side view, I just started with this line here. So that's this line over here. So I started here. You can see I drew this, I extended this reference line to be the end or the tips of my fork, and then I extended this reference line here to be where it would dip down, and then I extended this reference line would be where it dips back up, and then I reference the end point from the tip up here to the bottom down here. So that's an offset, I think, of about 10 millimeters, if I remember correctly. So the distance from here over to this bottom. So with those reference points, and I used circles instead of lines. So from the tip, I used a radius for this measurement, and then when I was drawing the spline, I just used the quadrant, or this, where the 2 lines intersect the circle and the line, as a snap point. So the point being here, use lines, as many as you need to create for yourself some reference points, and from those reference points you can then kind of connect the dots using your snaps. That's how I created this outline here. And for a spline, this has already been joined together, so it's no longer, I can't go to fit points. It'll probably ruin it. So I'm not going to do that. But on a normal spline, let me just draw one. So to finish a spline, it's different from finishing a line. Like normally in a line you would press escape, but for splines you want to press enter to keep that line. Alright, so now if I didn't like this, I can always grab a point and reposition it. But a lot of times you'll need extra points. So depending on how you drew it, you can add fit points. I can't add, like if I wanted to add a point between here and here, I can't click on this point because that was the last point that I drew. I can only extend or add a point this way. So I want to grab this point here. Just hover over it and do add fit point. Now I have an additional fit point that I can adjust. Say I didn't want it as angled. So I click right there. So when you're creating your splines, a lot of times the first time you make it, it's not perfect. So you need to either add some fit points or adjust fit points to make it look the way you want it to. Okay, so from your top view and your side view, once you get those modeled in 2 dimensions with just lines and they're all joined together, so this is all one spline and this is all one spline, then you're ready to extrude them. So with extruding, you want to make sure that it doesn't have to be exact, but it needs to be enough. And I'll explain that. So this one needs to be, the side view needs to be extruded enough to fit between this line or this side and this side. And in my drawing that was 30 millimeters. So I need it to be a minimum of 30. It can be more than that. It just can't be less than that. So I'm going to go ahead and extrude this one since I know that. Extrude. So it has to be a minimum of 30. I'm going to just do 60 to make sure I have plenty. Now this one, I need to make sure that it is extruded enough so that it will fit between this point and this point. So on my drawing, the distance between here and here, but this way. So it's about, I know it's about 15 millimeters, but I'm going to just be safe and extrude it a lot more than that. Let's just go ahead and do like 40. Okay, so I already did that work over here, and the next step in this process would be to flip this. Now to rotate this, the 2-dimensional rotate tool, you would have to change your UCS and yada yada. But if you want to flip anything in 3 dimensions, this is a really quick and easy tool to use. It's 3D rotate. So I'm going to click on this tool, click on the object that I want to rotate, press enter, and then you get these options here. So each of these circles represents a plane or an axis that you would rotate on. So if I orbit, I can tell I want to rotate it along this circle. So I'm going to click on this circle to begin the rotate process. You can see it's rotating the right way. I just need to specify the angle. And I know I want it to be a 90-degree rotation from where it is right now, perpendicular. So it flipped it like the fork is upside down. So if I wanted to make it upright, which I'm going to, then I would need to rotate 180 degrees from there. It doesn't really matter, but I just want the tips to be facing up, not down. So the next process would be to move them to be intersecting. So you need to just move one of these enough to where it's overlapping. To do that, you could use the move tool. Let me just use that as an example. So click on that, select the object, then you want to specify a base point. That's where you're grabbing the object. And since I know the tips are the highest point, I could choose a point like the midpoint here. I'm going to grab it from here and snap it somewhere along this plane, because that's the tallest point of the tip of the fork. Alright, so now there's a little space here. I'm a little concerned that's not overlapping. So you want it to be fully encompassed. You don't want any part of it sticking out other than the extra stuff that we extruded. So I'm just going to lower this 10 to make sure that none of that's sticking up. So this extra stuff outside of there is fine, and also this stuff outside of there is fine, but you want to make sure that they're both intersecting. And if you have this offset somewhere over here, that's not going to work. Control Z. So I'm going to go back and show you an easier way. Would be to just select the solid and use these arrows. So I know I don't ever want to use this red arrow because it's perfectly aligned right now. So I could use this green arrow to move it over this way. And then I can orbit just to make sure there's nothing sticking up. If I wanted to, just to make sure, I could just lower this just a smidge. So that's what I did in over here, this step. So when I extruded them, I chose the right layer so that they would be colored differently. And then I made sure they were overlapped. And the last step to make your fork is to go to the solid tab. And this is the new tool that we're using, is intersect. So if you hover over that, it will tell you what the tool does. Basically, wherever the two solids are overlapping will remain, and everything else will disappear. So I'm going to click on intersect, choose both objects, enter, and you're left with your fork.